Crisis number one of Jackson's administration is nullification. And this is potentially the most confusing out of the three. So we want to get this one out of the way. So I want to introduce you to John C. Calhoun. He is a name to know, really important representative from South Carolina. Now, we've addressed nullification a bit in the past. So this is an idea that comes under the compact theory. So we've definitely kind of glanced over this in the past, but this is where it really makes the nation vulnerable. So it becomes a very real possibility here. All right, so brief overview here of what's going on. So we're back to tariffs once again. So remember that tariffs are a part of Clay's American system component, a really crucial part. It's a great way to bring in more money into the Treasury. It helps these manufacturing companies. The North is always going to want the tariff because the North is the home of manufacturing. And so the better deals they can get, they're going to go for that. The South, however, are not going to be into this. There are very few manufacturers in the South. They are importing a lot of items from European nations. So tariffs are going to make those products more expensive for them. So they are not a fan of this. The South is pretty much always going to be outvoted on this topic for the time being. And once again, we're all coming back to these representation issues. We haven't gotten very far from 1787. So they're going to be outvoted because what we're starting to see is a lot of people leaving states like South Carolina and moving farther west. So they're not going to be able to counteract the votes from the North and the West. So you can see we have a whole series of tariffs that are being implemented here. So 1816, 1824, 1828. Ones you really need to know are 1828 and 1832. You know, 28 is going to be good when it's got that nickname of the tariff of abominations. Okay, so we've got the tariff of abominations. That is the tariff of 1828. This is after specific things like woolen items. So again, these are going to be the kinds of finished products you would see in the North. So the South is getting outraged. They feel like they are being erased from these decision-making processes. So even though the tariff of 1832 is going to be lowered, that seems like that's what the South wants, but it's not going to be enough. So again, like I mentioned, South Carolina is having a population drain. They've also got an economic decline for the past 15 years. And again, this drain is happening because the old Southwest has been opened. So they start getting worried. Maybe this really isn't just about the tariff. Maybe this is just the beginning. Maybe us losing this power in Congress means that they're coming for slavery next. So it wasn't so much about the tariff, but what precedent it could be setting up. So we're coming into this idea. Calhoun is brilliantly going to be presenting this idea to a new generation, basically. So just to refresh our memories, nullification is the idea that states can declare any federal law null and void if they believe that it is unconstitutional. And Calhoun and people in the South believe that this is unconstitutional because it is really diverging these regions too much. Also keep in mind, John C. Calhoun is Jackson's vice president. So this is going to get a little tricky. So he thinks he can convince Jackson. Jackson is sort of a Southerner. He'd been a slave owner, all of these things. But if you know anything about Jackson, he is very difficult to sway. So he is unsuccessful in trying to sway Andrew Jackson to his line of thinking, and so he quits. He resigns in 1832 and then runs for senator. So he becomes the senator from South Carolina. So if you want to be thinking about a Southern voice when we're getting into all of this sectionalism and compromises, you need to think about Henry Clay is from the West, even though Kentucky doesn't seem very West to us. And we've got Calhoun from the South and Daniel Webster from the North. So those are good names to commit to memory. And then it explodes. So Congress passes the tariff of 1832. Again, this is woolens, iron, and hemp. South Carolina invokes nullification. And not just calling up nullification, they start calling up the military. They are threatening to put force behind this because Jackson is saying that he will send the military into South Carolina to collect the tariff by the end of the bayonets. So Jackson is going to pass the force bill with Congress's help. So this is going to authorize the federal government to enforce the tariff. Who are we going to call when we need a compromise? Of course, it is Henry Clay. So he is going to help get past the tariff of 1833, which is going to take the rates of 32, which had already lowered the rates from 1828, and just slowly but surely lower it even more, so that when the Southern folks are trying to buy their imported goods, they're not going to be quite as expensive as they would have otherwise. South Carolina backs down. They call back the military. Sigh of relief. But they do one little last act of defiance, and they nullify the force bill. So one last little middle finger to Jackson to say, you know, we get the last word there. So we pass the test. Thank goodness for Henry Clay. If it had not been for Henry Clay, most historians agree that this would be where the Civil War would have begun in 1832 and 1833. So well done, Henry Clay. Okay, and there is fluency fact card, so make sure that you take note of that. And like I mentioned, I think this is the most complicated of all of these crises that we'll be examining here, because tariffs get a little bit confusing, especially when we have so many of them. Okay, so just to recap, tariff of abominations is 1828. 1832 is going to be a lower version of that, and then it's going to bring into this question of nullification. We've got the force bill. We've got this kind of a game of chicken between Calhoun and Jackson, and see who's going to blink first. And Calhoun and South Carolina do blink first, so they do not go to war over this. Again, thanks to Henry Clay for the compromise tariff.